Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Lincoln and why Lincoln is struggling so much in the US market when their biggest competitor, Cadillac, is doing the best that they have done in years. Before we get into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. Let's get into it. Let's start things off by going over Lincoln sales figures over the last few years and compare them to Cadillac sales figures because it shows a pretty interesting trend with both of the automakers. So prior to the pandemic, Lincoln was selling over 100,000 units per year in the US market, which, yeah, I mean, that's super strong for a luxury brand here in the United States. Now, once the pandemic hit, things started to decline, and this year is most likely going to be the worst year they have had in quite some time. They might not even crack 80,000 units, so pretty large decline. Now, if we look over at Cadillac, different situations. So prior to the pandemic, they were selling a lot of cars. I mean, they almost hit 200,000 units some years, but 150,000 units, that was pretty much the average for Cadillac prior to the pandemic. Then their sales slumped a massive amount throughout the pandemic. Now, a big part of that wasn't due to demand with the cars. It was more due to supply. Cadillac wasn't able to build enough cars. But things have rebounded. Last year, they sold over 134,000 units, and this year is set to be Cadillac's best year in years. Like, they're most likely going to crack well over 150,000 units. So Lincoln is declining at the same time that Cadillac is going up in sales. And I think that they are like as competitive as it gets. Like, when people go and shop for the luxury cars that these manufacturers offer, they almost always cross shop both of these brands. So what is Cadillac doing well that Lincoln is apparently not doing well, because Cadillac's gaining buyers at the same time that Lincoln's losing buyers? The first thing that I think has the biggest weight is simply image. Cadillac has been able to change how people view them over the last couple of decades. Cadillac and Lincoln used to both be viewed as old people brands. And Cadillac still somewhat has that stigma against it, but it's been able to escape that to an extent, whereas Lincoln has not been able to escape that. People still kind of view Lincoln as an old person brand. And so what did Cadillac do different? Well, first off, in the early 2000s, right, you had the Escalade that they blinged out. And so that kind of appealed to a younger audience rather than an older audience. So that was part of it. But the other part of it is Cadillac has released some serious performance vehicles that, appeal, like, obviously the people that buy them are generally older, but it appeals to a younger buyer base. And so that younger buyer base, when they finally have the money to afford a Cadillac, they go with it because Cadillac's a cooler brand. Look at the V-Series cars. That's a really good example. I mean, the CT5V Blackwing, for example, manual transmission, supercharged V8, and the Escalade V, right? Their SUV that they've VI'd, as you can say. So Cadillac has released some serious performance cars, so it's helped out their brand image a massive amount. And so although they might not sell a ton of those performance cars in terms of their overall volume numbers, they just bring people to the brand. Lincoln hasn't done that whatsoever. Instead, Lincoln has just tried to focus on making the quote-unquote bread and butter cars of the luxury brand really good. The Aviator, for example, and the Navigator. Those are the two vehicles that Lincoln seems to consistently sell in the highest number amounts. But again, because they don't have anything cool, it doesn't really lead people. So I think Lincoln has a huge image problem that they didn't spend enough time to get out of, and so people still view it as an old person brand. But that's not enough to make the brand decline a massive amount in sales figures. The next part is the dealership experience. So I'm not going to say that Cadillac dealerships have the best experience on the planet, but it's more often that you'll see a standalone Cadillac dealership than you'll see a standalone Lincoln dealership, right? With most Lincoln franchises, they're just inside of a Ford dealership. So with a Cadillac dealership, you might be able to, get more of a luxury experience when you buy the car. Versus with a Lincoln, there's a 99% chance that it's just in a Ford dealership, so you're gonna have the same exact experience as someone who's buying a Ford. And for people that are spending the extra money that a Lincoln costs when it comes to the buying experience and the servicing experience, it might not be worth it for them. They might want a different experience. So I think that also has definitely played a part. I mean, this is something that Genesis struggled with for quite some time because all of the Genesis franchises were in Hyundai dealerships, but now that Genesis has become big enough that dealer principals can justify building standalone Genesis dealerships, it's helping the brand expand because people have a different experience when they buy a Genesis versus a Hyundai, even though, from the same manufacturer like Ford and Lincoln. So I definitely think that that also plays a part. And then the next thing just comes down to the types of vehicles that Lincoln offers. They are in the right segments when it comes to luxury cars. They've got a big full-size SUV, the Navigator. They got the Aviator, which is a 3-row luxury SUV. And then you've got the Corsair as well. And then the Nautilus, right? The Corsair is the smallest, and the Nautilus is in between. I mean, if you look at the Ford counterparts, the Corsair is basically an Escape, the Nautilus is an Edge, and then the Aviator is an Explorer, and then the Navigator is an Expedition. And this pretty much mirrors what Cadillac has with the XT4, the XT5, the XT6, and the Escalade. But there are some key differences when you look at the cars in terms of what both of the automakers are offering. On the low side of things, I feel like they compete against each other pretty well, and I think that Lincoln actually wins out in some cases. Like, for example, with the XT5 versus the Nautilus, I think the Nautilus is just a better looking car. The XT5 is starting to feel pretty outdated. And then when you jump up to the bigger vehicles, Lincoln's actually better, in my opinion, in the Aviator segment compared to the XT6, because the Aviator actually has a real performance engine, whereas the XT6 does not. It has a naturally aspirated V6 that's just not good enough for that type of car. And then once you pop up to the Navigator and the Escalade still offers a V8. You have a high performance V8 as well, whereas Navigator, twin turbo V6. And so I think that that's kind of why. And then also the Escalade, like I said, status symbol with that vehicle. And so as you can see, even though they are competitive, or Lincoln's relatively competitive with Cadillac in the different segments, Cadillac in the important segments edges out. And then for the other things that I mentioned prior in the video with the image issue, and then on top of that with Cadillac doing the high performance stuff. So there are some other things I think that are pulling Lincoln down, but I think that's the main stuff. Is ultimately Lincoln has an image issue. They don't have standalone dealers because dealer principals can't justify spending the money with the volume that Lincoln sales and the profitability with Lincoln's. And then, with their lineup, it's competitive with Cadillac, but for a lot of buyers, it's not like it's way better, right? You look at what Genesis has done to pull buyers in. They made a product that is substantially better than the cars they're trying to compete against, and they've put it at a more reasonable price point. Whereas with Lincoln, most of the cars are as expensive as the Cadillac counterparts, and in some cases they are objectively better, but for the most part they're just competitive. Let me know what you guys think about this whole Lincoln situation. Let me know what you guys think about is going to happen with Lincoln moving forward, but there is potential that Lincoln could be another one of Ford's failed projects. I mean, remember when they used to own Land Rover, Jaguar, like all those luxury brands, and now they only have Lincoln. So we could see a world where Ford Motor Company is just Ford. I'll see you.